Welcome, everybody, to Radicalized Truth Survives. I'm Heidi Kuda. We are now on episode 122. We are bringing in our very good friend, Sian Norris. She is the senior investigative reporter for openDemocracy, and she has been doing a lot of investigating and mapping out of the networks that Elon Musk is pushing to exploit the victims of grooming gangs to his own fascist ends. Have a listen. Sian Norris, thank you so much for joining us again today. I wish that we would be meeting you under better circumstances always. We seem to always be meeting during these real inflection points. But again, I think part of what RadPod continues to accomplish year after year is to inform people on these global networks and these global connections. So I just would love for you to give our listeners kind of a snapshot on some of the current investigations you're working on, because they are so meaningful as we come from America to the UK and look around the world and see this authoritarian creep that's continuing to build.
Yeah, so thank you for having me back on. I guess the reason I wanted to speak to you today really is because of the kind of chaotic posting from Elon Musk about UK affairs that has been taking place since sort of New Year's Eve and into the first week of the year, leading to all sorts of calls in the right-wing media in the UK and also in the Houses of Parliament, but so much of it based on really severe disinformation. So for those of you who haven't been following, sort of towards the end of December, Musk started posting about grooming gangs in the UK and accusing the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, of being responsible for what Musk called the rape of Britain, and calling Jess Phillips, the safeguarding minister, who has dedicated her entire career to fighting men's violence against women and girls, a rape genocide apologist. And it's been incredibly shocking, just really, really horrible to see the weaponization of sexual abuse of girls by the far right in order to sort of push a kind of conspiracist disinformation agenda. And what's been really interesting for me to witness and to analyze is how Musk's interventions on this issue have been picked up by the wider far right. So the British far right activist Tommy Robinson has become really active again in talking about these grooming gangs, in trying to make false claims about Labour and left-wing complicity in grooming gangs. And we've also seen a real intervention from US far-right voices and influencers in this issue, which again is something that they don't seem to know very much about. It's something that they're really taking their cues off from Musk. And it's a really clear example of the sort of network nature of them. They take these conspiracies, they take these tropes, and they share them across these international networks in order to foster discontent with democracy, in order to undermine trust in governments, in the rule of law, in the criminal justice system, and in order to push the far-right Great Replacement conspiracy.
Thank you so very much. So first of all, Sian, thank you so very much for the work that you do. It's so important. Not enough people are actually taking the time to map out what's going on behind what really is this moral outrage farming. What concerns me when I hear this is there's a tendency for those of us who've been doing this work for so long to roll our eyes and go, not this again, not this trope again, not this meme again. We've seen it so many times before, but what is so concerning is how effective it is.
Yes, and I mean, there's a reason particularly why this one is effective. And I think it's worth kind of backpedaling a little bit just to explain to your audience what the grooming gang scandal is, because especially if you're not in the UK, you might not know about it. And especially if your source of information on it is Elon Musk, you definitely won't know about it. So in the early 2010s, news stories and started to emerge about a trend of mostly Muslim, mostly British Pakistani men in the northwest of England, grooming and raping and sexually exploiting mainly white working class teenage girls. And it was a huge scandal. I mean, it was one of the most horrific examples of organized child sexual abuse that we have seen. The situation was particularly made worse by the fact that the police, social services, child safeguarding services did not believe the girls who were being victimized. They saw them as criminals because they might have been, picked up for shoplifting or chaotic behavior. They saw them as like bad girls who were getting drunk, who were taking drugs, and they, saw them as girls who were consenting to the abuse. So there was this absolutely massive safeguarding and policing failing in the sort of late 90s, 2000s, early 2010s, which meant, hundreds of girls were being raped and abused, and their abusers were doing so with impunity. That's proven. We know this. This is what happened. And it's really important to recognize that, because nobody, in criticizing what Musk is doing, wants to in any way diminish or ignore the very real harms that were done to these young women and these girls. However, the sort of disinformation that we are seeing in relation to this is, first of all, this happened, this was sort of happening about a decade ago when it first hit the news, but it doesn't mean that it's not been happening still, and it doesn't mean that the legacy of abuse is not really important and goes on for years and years. However, Musk has grabbed hold of this issue sort of out of nowhere in order to try and undermine and criticize the British Labour Party. So the Prime Minister was formerly the Chief Prosecutor. He was the Director of Public Prosecutions in the British criminal justice system. And he had this job when the grooming gang scandal first came to light. Now, Musk and his outriders are trying to say that Starmer was, as I say, responsible for the rape of Britain, that he failed to hold these grooming gangs to account, and that in doing so, he is complicit in the abuse of these young women and these girls. This completely ignores the fact that it was Starmer who actually got the prosecutions rolling, that it was his colleague and appointee Nazim Afzal who put many of the groomers and rapists and exploiters in prison, and that Starmer, when he was at the DPP, when he was in charge of the CPS, was responsible for implementing reforms that meant the harms and failings that were done to these girls, the failure to believe them, the sort of insistence on prosecuting them for crimes when in fact they were victims. He put in reforms that tried to tackle this behavior so that victims had a better chance of justice. So you can understand how it's like really, really infuriating as someone who remembers this happening very clearly, to see people like Musk putting out disinformation to say that Starmer was somehow responsible or complicit in these crimes. So that's the kind of background, that's the grooming scandal. I think what's really, really important in looking at what's happening now with the sort of Musk tweets, the Tommy Robinson posts, the hyped up kind of rhetoric that we're seeing for the wider US and UK far right, is that they are using this term rape genocide apologist. Now, this has a complete and utter, vile term to use for people like Jess Phillips, who, as I mentioned, has spent her entire career fighting against men's violence against women and girls. But it's really linked to their ideology of great replacement. The reason that the far right is concerned primarily with Muslim grooming gangs is not because they care about the victimization of women and girls. It's because they see the rape of white women and girls by brown men as a form of white genocide. So they use the term rape genocide apologist because their ideology is centered on this idea of white genocide, of great replacement. And it's particularly frustrating, again, for me, obviously I mentioned about the fact that they've kind of misrepresented Keir Starmer's role. And, I'm a Labour voter, but I'm not just going to completely support Starmer for no reason. I'm very critical of him, as I'm critical of all politicians. But in this respect, he did the right thing at that time. But we really can notice that there is a failure in the far right to sort of take any notice of any other forms of child sexual abuse and child sexual exploitation. We don't see them talking about grooming gangs when the perpetrators are white. We don't really hear them talking about the kind of investigations that I do. So I've just done a massive investigation into child sexual abuse in the British military. This isn't something that they're exercised about. They come out in numbers, they come out with disinformation, they come out with their ideology when it's a racialized situation. But we also know from research, particularly from the UK government research, that child sexual exploitation is not a racialized crime. Child sexual exploitation is a crime that majority men commit against children, and the majority of those children are girls. It is a gendered crime. It's nothing to do with race. And there is no indicator that any ethnic group or community is more likely to commit these crimes than
Thank you
any
so
other.
much for that incredibly nuanced explanation of this fire that you're documenting. Hi-Fi, I would like to ask one more question and then I'll turn it over to you. And the reason is that you basically hit on a playbook that was very effective in the rise of the Nazis in Germany. I wrote about the Sonderkommission on the Rhine. There was this propaganda movement, very ugly, vitriolic, that basically weaponized the fact that there were soldiers of color guarding the Rhineland that were part of the French army. And they made all kinds of false allegations. In this case, the allegations were false, of these Black soldiers raping their German white women. And this was used to create a frenzied mob, to create people who were incredibly fearful and incredibly racist. And the power of that cruel, effective playbook helped stoke this mob to support these National Socialists. And Trump and J.D. Vance were using the same playbook when they were talking about the Haitian immigrants eating animals. They're continually stoking outrage farming around racialized issues. So I think what you're describing is an opportunity that was seized upon to further stoke this radicalized base and further accelerate the radicalization over something that they weaponized for their own purposes. And I find it to be super, I don't want to say terrifying because that gives them so much power, but it's like, I know what they're doing. And it works unless people begin to wake up from these dark fairy tales and see how horrible these people are. Musk is literally attempting global domination for the autocratic class.
I mean, it is important again to emphasize that the crimes did happen. There was a scandal of mostly Pakistani British men raping mostly white working class girls. That happened. It's not racist to point that out, and it's not the same as the false allegations that you were referring to in the Rhineland. I mean, but it is really important to keep emphasizing that while these crimes committed by members of the British Muslim community were horrific, so are the crimes committed by white British men, so are the crimes against women and girls committed by any race, any ethnicity, any community. And it's, again, the fact that the far right is determined to take this one example and to weaponize it in order to, push this sort of genocidal white genocide narrative is the problem. And the thing, again, that makes me so angry and makes me so desperately upset is how it completely ignores the voices of victims and survivors. There is no kind of care or acknowledgement of victim survivors' voices in this. Musk isn't platforming the voices of women and girls who have been harmed in this way. He's not showing any empathy or care with them. He's just sharing disinformation about the British state's response to these crimes. And I keep sort of mentioning this woman, Jess Phillips, the safeguarding minister. Some of the victim survivors from one of the grooming gangs in Telford have come out and said, this is a woman who showed us support and kindness when their victimization was revealed. So, there's a real lack of focus on their voices, and instead this kind of classic example of men talking over women and girls. But yeah, I don't want to ignore the fact that these crimes did happen and they were devastating, and the details of those crimes are really devastating. The other thing I wanted to potentially mention as well is just going back to this kind of networked idea between the US and the UK, is that currently Tommy Robinson, real name, prison for contempt of court in a libel case related to a Syrian teenager. But more and more we're seeing primarily US influencers, US far right figures posting in defense of him and posting disinformation that says the reason he's in prison is because he was outspoken on grooming gangs and on rape gangs. And that's been really interesting to observe as well, because really Tommy Robinson is not that popular in Britain. Like, he's not kind of seen as a good guy. We don't, the fact that Nigel Farage, the leader of the Reform Party, has like distanced himself from Tommy Robinson is because he recognises that it's electorally harmful to put yourself next to him. So it's been interesting that the US has kind of led this defense, like prominent US influencers have led this defense of Tommy Robinson and pushed the disinformation around his imprisonment. And again, it goes to show that rather than sort of individualized movements or national movements, the far right today is very much a networked international group of specific individuals pushing specific narratives that can then be picked up and disseminated by their followers and by the people who support
Thank
them.
you for that. High fidelity.
In my, when I hear stories like this and I see things like this occurring, I look into the people who are involved. What I know about Elon Musk is that he has multiple accusations of sexual impropriety against him. What I know about Tommy Robinson is that he has a history of convictions for violence. Some of the influencers that are supporting Tommy Robinson, real name Stephen Yaxley, some of the people who are supporting him are the Tate brothers, who are currently being charged with crimes dealing with sexual impropriety and violence and trafficking of minors, etc. It seems to me that we have a wolf calling out, somebody's in the hen house, but really they're going to tear the entire thing apart. Do these people feel to you like any sort of credible sources, or does every single one of them have some sort of issue in their past?
I mean, I don't really see them as credible sources because they're failing to get to grips with the causes of male sexual violence against women and girls, which is misogyny. They're focusing on race as a driver of this kind of offending, when we know that it is not race that drives child sexual exploitation. It is gender. It is, it's a gendered crime. So, I mean, that's important to state. I think it's important as well to consider, as I said, which cases the far right is interested in. It's interested in these particular grooming gang scandals because it allows them to push their white genocide narrative. So the British NGO Hope Not Hate, which is an anti-racist organisation, has done some research and found that at least 20 members and supporters of Tommy Robinson's old organisation, the English Defence League, were convicted of child sexual exploitation offences. And some of those were active in the EDL while, Tommy Robinson was leading it. That's not to say that he condoned that behaviour. It's not to say that he was aware of it, but it's a case in point of men on the far right being involved in child sexual abuse while they're also claiming that this is a Muslim problem and has nothing to do with white men. Similarly, I think it's really important that we recognise how the far right completely went after feminists and Me Too, completely, tried to claim that it was a witch hunt against men, that it had gone too far, that the women who, accused powerful men of sexual abuse were all like playing the victim card and, all this nonsense about how they talked about Me Too. And it's really important to remember from my own experience that the far right has absolutely no compunctions of sending women rape threats on the internet. And most of those rape threats are happening on Musk's platform. So, he runs a platform where rape threats against women journalists are incredibly common. It's also worth pointing out that Elon Musk is very close to Donald Trump. He's probably going to have a role in the administration. And as we know, a judge in New York found that the rape allegation made by E. Jean Carroll against Donald Trump was substantially true. So again, he doesn't seem to have a problem with that. Another example, sorry, I have so many of these, is this week, Andrew McIntyre, who was one of the ringleaders of the race riots in the summer in the UK, was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison, which is a sentence that Musk criticised. And I'm going to read you something that McIntyre said, and I apologise because it is quite graphic. He said in a Telegram message, "I wish to let Redacted know that I intend to brutally violate her and then bleed her to death." So while Musk is criticising the fact that this man is going to prison for his actions in the summer and making these claims about how, Starmer is responsible for the rape of Britain and about grooming gangs, this is, the kind of person that he's defending. So it's very difficult to feel convinced that the far right takes men's violence against women and girls seriously when, as you say, in its own ranks, there are these individuals. And when people like Musk are happy to defend men who write horrible, rape threats against women, and will work with a man who was credibly found by a New York judge to have raped a woman.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much both for the question and the response. That's really important stuff. Ruth Ben-Ghiat's book, Strong Men, talks about control of women's bodies being part of the rise of authoritarianism. And you yourself write how the far right is built on male supremacy, determined to restore a fascistic natural order where women are subordinate to men. I bring that up because in the trauma days, right after the election, you had people like far right commentator Nick Fuentes saying, my body, your choice. You had this, and it was very, very traumatic for young women, very traumatic for those who'd already been through, Trump 1.0 and all of that horror. It was the language of misogyny was obviously weaponized as Trump, rose up the food chain to become the Republican candidate. But I just think it's really important when you talk like this that we need to figure out a way to empower women to have the kind of spine to go, get into this and push back against it. And of course, men who support women. It's not, this is like a global thing about half the population being completely, marginalized in order to, make way for this male supremacy. How do you recommend people who are not misogynistic to expose this stuff and fight back and push back against it?
So, I think there's a really important role for sisterhood at this time.
Yes.
And I think it's really important that we support the women who are being attacked. So that's one thing that people can do quite easily, even if you just post that you support women like Jess and that you think the slanders against her are incredibly harmful. I think it's really important to do the work of challenging. We can acknowledge, and we must acknowledge, the harms that were done by these rape gangs to women and girls, but we don't have to acknowledge that by ignoring the harms done to other survivors, which is what the far right seems to be doing in this case. But yeah, it's a difficult one to answer because it is very overwhelming. And I think one of the really horrific things that we've seen this last week is the sort of ways in which the mainstream, particularly the Conservative Party in the UK, has taken on this disinformation in a way that is just really, really shocking and really damaging, and it kind of shows this real degradation of the Conservative Party, quite honestly. And I think we just have to keep pushing back. We have to keep acknowledging the harms done to victim survivors. We have to keep platforming the voices of victim survivors so that their experience is what is heard. And some victim survivors agree with Tommy Robinson. Some of them agree with Musk, and I can understand that. And I wouldn't ever try and silence their voices or tell them that they're wrong to do that, because they have their lived experience of this and they have a right to speak of their experience of this abuse. But we cannot let men dominate the narrative. These men tell women what they should think and feel about this abuse, and we have to make sure that more than anything we're always listening to victim survivors who actually know what this feels like and their experience, and stop ignoring that.
I just want to know why anyone in the British government is allowing Elon Musk to continue the way he is.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I don't think anyone in the British government is condoning this behaviour anymore. It's the opposition that is sort of is giving sort of support to the disinformation. But the Labour government needs to do much more in challenging Musk and being robust. And there's been a real fear, I think, in the Labour government because of Musk's closeness to Trump and because Trump is coming into power, that if they go too hard or if they, try and sort of do anything that really shuts him down, then that would have an impact on their international relations with the US government, which is, again, a completely crazy situation that we are in, where this tech billionaire is dictating foreign relations between two government allies, but we are where we are. I mean, since the comments about Jess, I think Labour have come out much more strongly condemning the comments from Musk, saying that they're unacceptable, saying that the far-right weaponization of this issue is harmful and has, no place in sensible discourse. It took them a little while, but I think, as I say, when he made those comments about Jess, it was like, that is the line and it's been crossed.
Thank you.
But we do need a much more robust way of thinking about Musk and the harms that platforms such as X are doing. And actually, Joe Mulhall from Hope Not Hate made a really astute comment today where he said that Twitter is a mainstream platform, but since Musk took over, its moderation and free speech policy has become more like the bespoke platforms that were built by the far right. So we have this really horrific, worst of both worlds, of a mainstream platform that still has a lot of mainstream support, a lot of people on it, with a far right moderation policy, which means these horrific views to flourish. And that's allowing this disinformation to enter and infiltrate the mainstream in a way that it wouldn't do if it was just happening on Gab or Truth Social.
So important. And we understand here in America, with what we've just been through, Musk has been engaging in election interference. He is trying to do that now globally, attacking certain countries. He's already, he tipped his hand about his attacking and trying to meddle in UK politics some months ago. And now I'm very happy that the EU is accelerating their investigation into him. It's not like, people aren't aware this is going on. Sean, I want to thank you so much for being with us here today, because it always comes down to the same thing. We are not powerless. We just need to show solidarity. And that is so important. And if you're looking for some inspiration, you can pick up Sean's book, Bodies Under Siege. She documents much of what she has just spoken about in that incredibly important book. And as always, I'm so glad that you spent time with us here today. And Hi-Fi, thank you as well. So onward and upward with some solidarity.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.